I'm going to let you in on a little secret about me. I hate surprises. A surprise party would be about the worst thing I could imagine as a way for me to celebrate. And I think it's because, as an introvert, to be in a crowd, I sort of need to get myself mentally ready. And so if you tell me we're going to have a little quiet dinner, or we're going to be home alone for the night, and then all of a sudden there's 40 people there, that is not going to go well. Phil knows this. I see Chris trying to egg him on over there. I'm just not ready for that scene. And so I don't like that idea at all. I also do not like the surprise startle that happens in a haunted house kind of scene, where somebody will jump out at you or make a big loud noise. No, thank you. No, thank you to either one of those. Now, there are others of you, you might be one of them, that love that element of surprise. The sort of adrenaline that gets going, or the surprise aspect of a party. And that's fabulous. Great. We are all different. Now, the surprise that I do love is a surprise, beautiful moment. Driving along Claremont Mesa Boulevard to pick up the kids at after-school care the other day, I was totally surprised by the sunset. It was spectacular, as though someone had painted a watercolor in the sky with purple and blue and pink hues, with a gorgeous sliver of a moon. That is the kind of surprise that I love. Or that surprise moment where you get an insight or a wisdom moment. Those are the surprises that I welcome. Now, in our story from Luke today, it's sort of a story of surprise. Peter would have been surprised in the boat that day with Jesus. Now, he was a fisherman. He knew how to fish. He knew what he was doing. He had been up for hours with the other fishermen in the boat and had not been able to catch anything. They would have found themselves back ashore, wondering how they were going to pay rent on their boat, because in that day and time, if you were a fisherman, you did not own the boat, but instead you rented the boat, if you will. And so you had to catch enough fish to make enough money to pay the rent for that boat. And so you can imagine that you pulled up onto shore, having caught nothing. You're tired, you're hungry, might be cold, and along comes Jesus and says, "Hey, let's go back out and fish." Now, Peter is probably not yet surprised. I'm guessing he's frustrated. Who is this guy telling me how to fish? I know what I'm doing. We didn't catch a darn thing. And now it's getting warmer, and the sun is up, and the fish are less likely to be out, and this is ridiculous. But Peter says two key words: but and yet. I've been fishing, but caught nothing, and yet I will go if you say so. So they set off. They put out their nets, and that's where the surprise comes in. All these fish, more fish than they have caught, more fish than one boat can hold. They got to bring over James and John's boat, and still there's more surprise. Jesus invites them to fish for people, to give up their day job and become disciples, to follow. This surprise comes for them in a moment of failure, in a moment where they have had a long and unsuccessful night, where they are incredibly frustrated, where they don't know how they're going to pay their rent on their boat, And surprise. And in addition, I can just imagine that they're wondering to themselves why on earth this Jesus character has come and talked to them. Poor fishermen, uneducated, everyday folks who, according to this day, aren't even good at being fishermen. Jesus did not go to the wealthiest part of the city to find those people living in the mansions who are super successful, the elite of the day, the educated ones. Surprise, Jesus called this motley crew of seemingly unsuccessful fishermen. This surprise for Peter, James, and John is not just for Peter, James, and John. It's for us. Surprise. God is calling you, and God is calling me to fish for people too. But like Peter, James, and John, God calls us not when everything is perfect, not when we've got everything figured out and all our ducks are in a row and we're at a perfect silent retreat, perfectly in tune with God, perfectly ready to listen. Everything is perfect. We're ready to listen and be ready to follow. God calls to us in the middle of depression. God calls to us in the middle of our failures. God calls to us in the middle of our fears. God calls to us when we don't want to listen. God calls to us when we are least ready. And in the midst of those moments, surprise, God calls us and reminds us that we don't need to be afraid, that you have what it takes. Be not afraid that you're worn out. Be not afraid that you feel like a failure. Be not afraid that you don't know what you're doing. Be not afraid that you feel completely lost. Because God calls to us in those moments. Now, this all sounds neat and easy. We get to be surprised. We get to be assured that we don't need to be afraid. And we jump up and follow. Perfect. Easy. But I wonder about this. As I was reading this, I noticed there's a period in the midst of our story. I mean, there's several periods in the midst of that reading. But there's a period between these two verses. Then Jesus said to Simon, "Do not be afraid. From now on, you will be catching people." Period. The next sentence, when they had brought up their boats to shore, they left everything and followed him. Now, I wondered, how long was that period? Because if it were me, I would have a whole lot of questions. So maybe it happened really quick. Maybe Jesus said, "Don't be afraid, you're going to catch people." They got out of the boat and they left. Or, as I like to imagine it, maybe they were really far out and it was super windy and they had to row and row and row. That gave ample time for them to say, "Well, where are we going? Where am I going to sleep? What am I going to eat? How's this all going to work out?" And maybe they had this whole conversation and Jesus answered all these questions. I don't know. That's how I like to imagine the story goes. But regardless of how it happened, surprise, Peter, James, and John leave everything and follow Jesus. Surprise, Peter, James, and John leave what they know how to do, even if they're not so good at it, and they follow Jesus. Surprise, Peter, James, and John walk away from what they know and head out into the unknown. All because of what happened in that boat. Their encounter with Jesus, their encounter with the divine, and they are surprised by it, and they say yes. So whether you're like me and you don't like surprises, or whether you absolutely love a surprise, we can know that God will surprise us with some call that will leave us a little bit unsettled. God will surprise us with a call that warrants a cautionary, don't be afraid, it's going to be okay. God will surprise us when we least expect it with a call that invites us to jump out of the boat with a giant leap of faith. God will surprise us, and God will call us, each and every one of us, in different ways to different tasks, but God will call. If we're open just a teeny tiny bit, we don't have to be perfectly ready, because God's going to surprise us when we least expect it. May we be open to dropping everything and following. Amen.